didn't drive 400 miles for the open bar. I drove back because some part of me needed to hear my mother say the quiet thing out loud in a room full of the people whose opinions she actually cared about. And she did. She looked at me across the white tablecloths and the centerpieces she probably argued with a florist about for a month, and she said, loud enough to carry, "What's a little paper pusher like you doing all the way back here?" A few people laughed, not because it was funny, because that's what you do when the host makes a joke at someone's expense, and you don't want to be the one who isn't laughing. My father studied the ice in his glass. My sister's smile went stiff under all that careful makeup, and the man she was about to marry, the groom, went the color of the tablecloth. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me, and I watched him do the math, and I watched the answer land. Then he stood up so fast his chair barked against the floor, and he said, "Stop. Do you have any idea? But you can't understand that moment until you understand what they took from me first." I was 18 at a kitchen table that always smelled like lemon dish soap and burnt coffee. I had the acceptance letter, the financial aid summary, and the tuition bill laid out in a row like I was presenting a case. I'd practiced it in the car. I wasn't going to cry and I wasn't going to beg. I just said, I got in. The aid covers most of it. I'm short about $6,000 for the first year. I need help. My mother was peeling an orange. She didn't pick up a single one of those papers. You'll figure it out, she said. That's what being an adult is. My father had his laptop open at the end of the table, doing the thing he was best at, which was looking busy so he'd never have to be the one who said no. I turned to him. Dad. He glanced up for about a second. Your mom's right, he said, and went back to whatever wasn't really on his screen. That was it. No plan, no flants. Let's look at the loan options. No, let's see what we can do. Just a clean little sentence that told me exactly what I was. Not a daughter they wanted to invest in, a line item they wanted to cut. They called it teaching me independence, like it was a gift they were proud to give. 9 days later, my sister came home from school crying because her car was, in her words, embarrassing. Bryn was 16, pretty in a way that made adults forgive her things. She didn't ask for anything directly. She never did. She just talked at dinner about homecoming and how everyone would see the photos and how she'd be the only one getting dropped off in a 15-year-old Corolla. By that Saturday, there was a newer car in the driveway. Not a luxury car, a clean little crossover, 3 years old, low miles. Got a great deal on it, my father said, beaming like he'd done something brave. My mother handed Bryn the keys across the kitchen island like it was a coronation. You deserve nice things, she told her. Nobody looked at my tuition bill, which was still sitting on the counter under a stack of grocery coupons. That's how it worked in our house. They never had to announce who the favorite was. They just showed you in receipts. I should tell you why, because for a long time I needed it to make sense, and they were just cruel was never the whole truth. My mother grew up with nothing and clawed her way into a zip code where the neighbors had boats, and she spent the rest of her life terrified someone would figure out she didn't belong. Bryn was her proof. Bryn was charming and photogenic and good at being looked at, and every dollar spent on Bryn was a dollar spent on the family's image. I was the other kind of kid. Quiet, stubborn, useful, the one who could be relied on to not need anything. And the reliable child always gets fed last because she's the only one who won't make a scene about going hungry. My father just wanted peace more than he wanted to be fair, and peace in our house meant agreeing with whatever my mother had already decided. I went anyway. That fall I enrolled, took out the loans I was allowed to take, and worked the closing shift at a grocery store, then a second job answering phones at a tire shop on weekends. I ate a lot of rice. I got good at the math, the kind where you know exactly how much is in the account, down to the gas in the tank. Then halfway through the spring semester, my aide got reassessed over some clerical thing. A form a state office processed wrong, and suddenly I owed $3,200 in 2 weeks, or I'd be dropped from my classes. So I went back to that table one more time. New papers. Same practice to calm. My mother didn't even let me finish. No, she said. If we bail you out now, you'll never learn to stand on your own. I said very quietly, "You're paying for Bryn's everything." My father did his balancing act voice. "We can't fund 2 college situations at once. It isn't realistic." "That's interesting," I said, "because you never funded one." My mother's eyes went thin. "Don't be dramatic. Bryn's different. College actually matters for her." For her! I went up to my childhood bedroom that night, and something in my chest went still in a way that grief never does. It wasn't even anger. It was just clarity, finally. They didn't love me the way I'd spent 18 years trying to earn. They loved me best when I needed absolutely nothing from them. The day I needed something, I became a problem to be managed. In the morning, I withdrew. I signed the form online, watched my account lock, and felt this strange, clean relief, like shutting a window before a storm tears it off its hinges. I put what I owned into 2 plastic bins and a duffel, and I loaded my car in the driveway, and I didn't make an announcement, because announcements were for Bryn. My mother stood on the porch with her coffee. "So you're giving up," she said. I didn't fully turn around. "I'm choosing something that doesn't run on your approval." My father came out rubbing his forehead like I was a headache he was waiting out. "You don't have to do this. What are you offering me instead?" I asked. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. His silence had always been his real answer, the most honest thing about him. I left. I didn't have a grand plan. I had $1,100 and a car that needed brakes. What I had instead of a plan was a refusal, and refusal, it turns out, is a kind of engine. I rented a room from a retired school teacher who charged me under market because she liked that I worked 2 jobs and didn't throw parties. I enrolled at the community college, the cheapest credits in the state. And I took accounting because the woman at the advising desk said it was steady and it paid. And nobody could take a credential away from you once you'd earned it. That sentence stuck to me. Nobody can take it away once you've earned it. After everything, that sounded less like a career and more like a place to live. I was good at it. Not because I love debits and credits, but because numbers don't change their mind about you depending on who's in favor that week. A balance sheet doesn't have a golden child. It either reconciles or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, the truth is sitting right there waiting for somebody patient enough to find it. I was very patient. I'd had practice. 2 years of community college at night while I worked days. Then I transferred to a state university and finished my bachelor's the same way, 1 paycheck at a time, graduating with a load of debt and a GPA I'd bled for. The week I passed my last CPA exam section, I sat in my car in a parking lot and cried. And it wasn't sad crying. It was the other kind, the kind that comes out when you finally set down something heavy you've been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. My first real boss was a woman named Leah Frost, a senior examiner who'd been with a federal banking regulator for almost 30 years and didn't waste a word she didn't mean. She recruited me into the agency out of a job fair, where I think I was the only person who'd actually read what the agency did. She didn't flatter me. In our first interview, she said, "This work is unglamorous and it can make you very unpopular with very rich men. Are you okay being unpopular?" I told her I'd been unpopular my whole life and I'd lived. She almost smiled. "Then you might last." The job was bank examination. If you've never heard of it, that's by design, because the system is built to be invisible until it isn't. We're the ones who go inside banks and check whether they're actually as healthy as their press releases claim. We read the loan files nobody's supposed to see. We pull the books apart and look for the rot behind the marble lobby. A bank can look enormous and powerful and still be 1 bad quarter from a hole in the ground, and our job is to find the hole before the public falls into it. There's no uniform. There's no medal. There's a laptop, a badge that most people have never heard of, and a signature that by the time you're senior enough can decide whether an institution gets to keep doing business the way it wants to. It took me years to understand that the badge nobody recognizes is sometimes the most powerful one in the room. Julia taught me the thing that became the spine of my whole career. She said, "We don't get emotional, we get accurate." Emotion is something they can argue with. Accuracy isn't. I built myself out of that. I became the examiner who was unfailingly polite and completely immovable. Bank presidents would take me to expensive lunches and explain why their problem loans weren't really problems, and I'd thank them for the meal and write the finding anyway. Somebody on a deal team once called me the quiet one. You can't talk out of anything. It wasn't an insult. It was the closest thing to a reputation I'd ever wanted. My family resurfaced the way they always did, which was only when there was something to be gotten. The first call came about 3 years after I left. My mother's voice was warm as a Hallmark card, like we topped the day before. "We're so proud of you," she said. I waited. There's always a beat before the ask, and if you wait through it, you learn exactly what the call was really for. "Bryn's program raised its tuition," she went on. "It's just gotten so expensive." "I can't help with that," I said. "Oh, don't be like that. We're family." Family. The word sounded almost made up, like a town I'd driven through once. My father got on the line, careful and tired, and said anything I could spare would mean a lot. To whom, I wanted to ask. I told him I had a heavy travel quarter coming up and got off the phone, and I sat there afterward waiting to feel something dramatic, and felt only the flat confirmation of a thing I already knew. Distance had completely changed my life. It hadn't changed them by an inch. By my 8th year, I'd made examiner in charge, which means I'm the one who leads the team that goes into an institution, the one whose name sits at the top of the report, the one who signs. It's not the kind of authority you flaunt at parties. It's the kind you carry like a live wire, because a single rating, a single finding, can change the trajectory of a bank, and everybody whose name is on its org chart. My director, a dry man named Sumner who measured praise out in teaspoons, told me on the day I got the role, "This job is judgment, not feelings. You're going to see things people would pay a great deal for you not to see." I said I understood. He looked at my file over his glasses and said, "Your record says you do." Bryn came back into my life through a phone I didn't even want to be holding. A relative I barely spoke to tagged me in a comment under a photo, and there she was, my sister, a diamond on her hand, a beach behind her, a caption with more exclamation points than words. I almost scrolled past. Then I saw the man in the photo, and I saw the name in the caption, and something in me went very still and very professional all at once. Bennett Crane. I knew that name. Not personally. From a file. Bennett Crane was the newly installed president of a fast-growing regional bank that my team had been examining for the better part of a year. A bank that had grown too fast, the way they always do right before they break, loading up on a kind of lending that looks brilliant when the economy is good and catastrophic the second it turns. We'd flagged it. There were findings. There was, sitting in my drafts that very week, a recommendation that could force that bank to raise capital, shrink, and unwind the exact strategy that had made its young president a rising star. His career, the glittering future he was about to promise my sister in front of 300 people, was leaning against a report with my signature line at the bottom. I pulled the file again that night just to be sure. Same Bennett Crane, same man. I sat with that for a long time. Life has a way of arranging coincidences that feel less like luck and more like a bill coming due. The invitation arrived a week later. Heavy cardstock, gold ink, my parents' names printed proudly at the bottom like producers of a show they'd been staging my whole childhood. I hadn't spoken to my sister in almost a decade. I hadn't set foot in that town since the morning I loaded my car. Every reasonable part of me said, throw it away. But it wasn't reasonable anymore. It was a conflict of interest, and conflicts of interest are not something you get to ignore in my line of work. The man at the center of an active examination I was leading was about to become my brother-in-law. The right thing, the only ethical thing, was to disclose it and step back from anything touching his institution. And to disclose it accurately, I had to be certain it was really the same man and not some clean coincidence of names. There was also, if I'm honest, a smaller, older thing in me that wanted to stand in that room one time as the person I'd become instead of the person they'd thrown out. I'm not going to pretend that part wasn't there. I just refused to let it drive. I RSVP'd, yes. The venue was exactly what my mother would pick. A restored estate with chandeliers and a string quartet and waiters in vests, the kind of place that costs more than my first year of tuition would have, the year they couldn't possibly find $6,000. I came in a plain navy suit. No drama. Heads turned anyway the way they do when someone walks in that nobody quite placed on the list. My mother found me near the entrance, and her face didn't soften, not for a second. Just that old flicker of irritation, like a draft had gotten in. "Well," she said, thin-lipped, "you actually came." Bryn was beside her, nervous, scanning my face for something I wasn't there to give. "You look different," she said. "So do you," I said, and meant it gently. My father hovered, smaller than I remembered, his eyes everywhere but on mine. And then my mother leaned in and looked me up and down, took in the off-the-rack suit and the lack of jewelry and the absence of a man on my arm, and she said it, loud enough to carry across the polished floor. "What's a little paper pusher like you doing all the way back here?" The laughter rippled out, uneasy and reflexive. Bryn's smile cracked. My father went rigid. And across the room, Bennett Crane turned white, not because of the insult, because he'd just placed me, not as the estranged sister, as the examiner in charge whose name was at the top of the report that could end everything he'd built. I watched the recognition detonate behind his eyes, watched him understand that the woman his future mother-in-law was calling a paper pusher had spent the last 11 months inside his books. His glass slipped from his hand and cracked against the floor. The quartet stumbled and stopped. He stood up. "Stop," he said, voice shaking. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" My mother blinked, genuinely confused, because in her world, the only people who mattered were the ones she'd already decided mattered. "Excuse me?" Bennett's voice came out low and stunned and carrying. "This is the examiner in charge on our bank. She runs the federal exam. She's the one who decides whether we pass." You could hear the air leave the room. My mother's face went gray. My father's drink trembled in his hand. Bryn looked at me like I was a stranger who'd been wearing her sister's face. And for the first time in my entire life, both my parents looked at me with something that wasn't superiority. It was fear. Because some kinds of justice don't arrive shouting. Sometimes they walk in wearing a plain navy suit and stand very still. I didn't react. I think that unsettled them more than anything Bennett had said. People expect anger or triumph or at least a little flash of satisfaction. They understand noise. They have no idea what to do with stillness. "This is ridiculous," my mother said, recovering the way she always did when humiliation triggered her survival reflex. "Don't be absurd." Bennett didn't blink. "I'm not being absurd. You're making a scene at your own daughter's wedding." "No," he said quietly. "You did." My father stepped forward at last, palms up, decades too late for the role of peacemaker. "Let's all just take a breath. Bennett, son." "Sir, with respect," Bennett said, and that word, respect, landed in the room like evidence, because he didn't mean manners. He meant rank. "This isn't something we take a breath about." Brenda's voice came out small. "Will somebody tell me what is happening?" Bennett looked at her, and his face came apart. The professional disaster and the personal one crashing into each other at once. "You didn't tell me your sister is a federal examiner." "I wasn't required to," I said, even, quiet. My mother's head snapped toward me. "Required," she spat the word. "What kind of cold, calculating stop?" Bennett cut her off, and the word cracked like something breaking. Guests flinched. My mother actually went silent, which I genuinely never seen because she was not used to being silenced by a man who 5 minutes earlier she'd considered the prize. He lowered his voice, and the restraint in it was worse than yelling. "You will not speak to her that way. I'd planned exactly none of this. I'd planned only to be accurate, and accuracy, once it starts moving, has a momentum all its own." I said, "Bennett, we should talk somewhere private." He straightened without thinking. "Yes, of course." "Whatever this is," my mother snapped, "it can be said right here." That was fear dressed as defiance. I turned and looked at her fully, for the first time all night, and she looked away first. She'd never had to do that before. We moved to a side room off the main hall, a little lounge with a closed door. Bryn followed, pale, her bouquet shaking in her grip. My parents came too, drawn along, a unit formed by crisis instead of love. Bennett spoke first. "I swear to you I didn't know you two were related." "I know," I said. "If you had, it wouldn't have changed anything I found." Bryn's voice broke. "Anything you found?" I kept it simple, only what was already public enough to say. "My team has been examining your fiancé's bank. There are serious findings. I'm not here to make threats about it, Bryn. I'm here because the moment I saw your engagement photo, I had a conflict of interest I'm legally required to disclose and step away from. I came to confirm who he was and to handle it the right way. That's the whole reason. The rest of it," I looked at my mother, "the rest of it just happened to be standing here." Bryn turned slowly toward our parents. "What does she mean, the rest of it?" Her voice had something raw in it now, something unrehearsed. "She means college, doesn't she? She means you didn't pay for hers." My mother lifted her chin. "We did what we thought was best." "That's not an answer," Bryn said, and the word tore out of her. "You bought me a car. You bought me everything. And you let her drop out and work at a tire shop, and you told me she just quit. You told me she gave up on us." She was crying now, mascara going, the whole careful picture coming undone. "I believed you. I spent 10 years thinking she abandoned me." "We did what we had to do," my mother said. "No apology, no denial, just justification, smooth and immediate, the way it had always been." Bennett looked at her like he was seeing the foundation of the family he'd been about to join and finding it hollow. "At the expense of your own child," he said. "She left," my mother said, ice cold. "I left," I said, "after you closed every other door." My father had aged a decade in 20 minutes. He sank into a chair. "I didn't understand the forms," he said hoarsely, which wasn't even true, and we all knew it, and the smallness of the lie was somehow the saddest part. "I should have asked more questions. I should have fought for you." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He started to cry, a 60-year-old man undone by clarity that had taken decades to arrive. Bryn looked at me, and it wasn't anger on her face anymore. It was something so much worse. "Recognition. You didn't come here to blow up my wedding," she said. "No. You came to tell the truth." "I came to do my job honestly," I said. "The truth was already here. I just stopped agreeing to pretend it wasn't." She put a hand over her mouth. Then she said, "I need air," and walked out, her veil trembling behind her, her whole world rearranged in the space of one song the quartet never finished. I gathered the few papers I'd brought, the recusal disclosure I'd already drafted for my director, because I'd come prepared to do this part properly no matter what the room did. At the door, Bennett's voice stopped me. "Ma'am." I turned. His face was gray, his tie loosened, a man whose wedding day had become a reckoning. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For not knowing. For the way she just talked to you." "That wasn't yours to fix," I said. He nodded, then added with a quiet that surprised me, "You didn't deserve any of it." I looked at him for a moment. He was, as far as I could tell, just a guy who'd worked hard and grown a bank too fast, and stumbled into a family I knew better than he did. No, I said, but I came through it anyway. Bryn found me outside 20 minutes later. The winter air off the parking lot was sharp and honest and didn't care about anybody's feelings, which I appreciated. She'd taken off the veil. She hugged her own arms against the cold. "Why don't you hate me?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "I did," I said, "because she deserved the truth. For a long time." She nodded, taking it without flinching. "But not forever," I said. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know. They told me you just stopped caring about us. I know they did. I should have called. I should have asked you instead of them." "You were 16, I said. "You were a kid being handed everything by people who were very good at making it look like love. You're not the one who did this to me, Bryn. You just happened to be standing in the warm spot." She let out a wrecked little laugh. "You always do that. Answer like you're not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not." She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time since we were small there was no competition in it, no scoreboard, just grief. "I spent years thinking you abandoned us," she said. "I spent years understanding why I had to leave," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." "No," she agreed softly, "they're not." The wedding didn't happen that night. They postponed it. Bennett's bank, in the end, did exactly what banks like that do when the cycle turns. The findings my team had documented turned out to be the early, accurate warning they always are, and over the next year, his institution had to raise capital and shrink and unwind the very strategy that had made him a star. I had nothing to do with that part anymore. I'd recused myself the Monday after the wedding, filed the disclosure, and handed the file to another examiner in charge, who reached every conclusion I would have, because the numbers don't have a golden child either. Bennett didn't lose everything. He lost the easy version of his future, the one where the rules bend for the talented, and he learned what I'd learned at 18, which is that they don't. Not really. Not for anybody who's actually paying attention. He and Bryn married anyway, a year and a half later, in a small civil ceremony with about 30 people. No chandeliers, no quartet, my mother diminished in the front row, and my father holding it together by a thread. They're all right now, the two of them. Better than all right, I think. And the way people sometimes are when they've watched the polished version of their life shatter and chosen to build a truer one out of the pieces. My father writes me letters. Actual letters, ink on paper about ordinary things. The weather, his tomatoes, the bird feeder he finally hung. The regret is woven gently between the lines like a language he's still learning to speak out loud. I read everyone. I don't always answer, but I read them, and twice now I've written back. My mother never apologized. Some people will go to their graves defending their version of the story, and for a long time that haunted me, and then one ordinary Tuesday it just stopped. Because I finally understood that the goal was never to make her feel guilty. Guilt was hers to find or not find. The goal was to make the truth impossible to ignore, and the truth had walked into her perfect room in a plain navy suit and stood very still, and that was enough. That was the whole thing. People ask me, when this comes up, whether it was revenge, whether it felt good. And I tell them it wasn't revenge because revenge needs an audience and a victory pose, and I didn't want either. What I wanted was balance. I wanted the truth standing upright in a place where lies had been allowed to sit at the head of the table for 30 years. I took the lesson they tried to use as a weapon, independence, and I kept it. I just rewrote what it meant. Not abandonment, not exile, just a life I built with my own two hands that never once needed their permission to be real. If any of this landed somewhere familiar for you, sit with it a minute before you scroll on. Think about the quiet kind of damage that favoritism does, the kind that doesn't leave a mark anybody can see. Think about the cost of staying silent, and about what it can mean to finally tell the truth at exactly the right moment in exactly the right room. I'm still here, still telling these. Stay a while if you'd like to hear the next one.